Morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as uninvited guests, and I would like to thank them for their hospitality, for letting us work and run the government's affairs here in this building. I want to start by just applauding the government's effort during this global pandemic. They're highly motivated to help Canadians. They've been very receptive to the input from opposition parties. And I know from being on technical briefings and in the committees that all the opposition parties are bringing forward issues, and backbench Liberals as well. And the government is listening. And I'm thankful to the ministers of the Crown for being receptive to the concerns that I've brought forward from my constituents and from Canadians, and for listening and working with us. It shows that a minority government works and that we can work together in a crisis. We're working on gradually opening up sectors of our society, and we need to start to look at stimulus spending for Canada and what the recovery can look like. And we can do so much more with the recovery that we want to look at spending plans with an eye on climate change, because we are dealing with another crisis, and that's the climate emergency. So today I want to focus on green infrastructure spending, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and preparing Canada for future emergencies through green infrastructure development. I want to talk a minute about the Oxford report from Stearns and Stiglitz, Nicholas Stearns and Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winning economist. And they've brought forward a report. They did interviews with 200 experts from central banks and economists from the G20 countries. And they have some key findings that I would like to share. Number one, renewable energy and energy efficiency stimulus spending will deliver the greatest number of jobs per dollar spent in the short term. And right now, that's what we're going to need to get people back to work, especially in industries like the energy industry in Alberta. Investments in fossil fuels have stalled the economy there, and we need to get people working. One example of a green energy infrastructure investment would be that we've championed for a long time is a nationwide electrical grid. So a grid that runs east to west and north to south and connects the hydroelectric power that we have in British Columbia, Manitoba, Quebec, and Labrador with those provinces that don't have that same kind of storage capacity. There's great capacity and potential for wind and solar in the prairies, for tidal power on all three coasts, for geothermal across this country. And the hydroelectric system that we have in the four provinces that have great hydroelectric capacity will be the batteries and the storage for those intermittent power supplies. And having an east-west grid is a key piece of infrastructure. Energy retrofits of older buildings and homes are a prime opportunity for high-value stimulus spending. In addition to creating jobs, and programs directed towards low-income households would decrease social and health inequality. If we want to say thank you to our frontline workers, to those workers who are doing low-wage jobs right now, in the grocery stores, in the pharmacies, in all kinds of different facilities, what better way than to provide them with energy efficient homes to live in? So having a program where landlords can get the benefits that homeowners have had in the past to make their buildings more energy efficient and lower and reduce the costs for low wage workers to live, to lower their cost of living and the cost of heating their homes. Upgrading Canada's healthcare infrastructure for more energy efficiency. Right now, 69% of hospitals in Canadian cities are more than 50 years old. And 49% of all hospitals in Canada are over 50 years old. Currently, there's a $15 billion maintenance deficit just in the healthcare system alone. Our healthcare system uses 11% of the public sector energy use and produces 5% of public sector greenhouse gas emissions. So a multiplying benefit, it would reduce energy, it would lower greenhouse gases, and it would prepare our healthcare system better for emergencies. And we know we're going to be facing further emergencies. We've been warned by scientists and epidemiologists that climate change is going to bring other pandemics, and we need to make sure that our healthcare system and our infrastructure there is robust. And so this would be a prime place to be looking at healthcare spending. We want to make sure that our infrastructure that we built is public infrastructure. And it's not done through P3s and privatized. And we should look at what happened with the Highway 407 in Ontario as an example of, a mistake that was made. This is a cautionary tale. It cost $1.5 billion to build that highway. It sold in 1999 for $3.1 billion to a Spanish multinational corporation. It's now valued at around $28 billion, and it costs Ontario drivers almost $1 billion a year to use that infrastructure. So imagine if that had stayed in public hands. Imagine if those tolls were going to the province of Ontario rather than to a Spanish multinational. We would be benefiting from that infrastructure. Selling infrastructure off is not a good answer in this time. I want to talk a second about the shock doctrine and Naomi Klein's book. Never let a crisis go to waste. And we've seen in the past, when we've been in crisis, how corporations have taken advantage of that. And they've brought in programs, and governments working with corporations have brought in programs that the public would never accept. And we're seeing that right now in Alberta. In Alberta, they're gutting the Alberta Energy Regulator has suspended environmental monitoring requirements, including wetland, wildlife, and bird monitoring, testing for methane leaks, despite the fact that the federal government has just put $750 million into ensuring that we reduce methane emissions. The Alberta government has cut their regulations to monitor their leaks. Air quality testing and other requirements agreed to by the industry to bring First Nations on board have been cut. So this is all because of the pandemic. And how does it help in a pandemic to cut regulations like that? I don't see how it helps. And this is after the government has also promised to spend $1.7 billion on cleaning up orphan oil wells. Those wells are the responsibility of corporations. And it's the Alberta government that allowed that mess to happen. And now taxpayers are cleaning up that mess. And when you cut regulations during a crisis so that you appease the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, who were asking for these kind of regulatory cuts and have wanted them for a long time, then you just create further problems that are going to be left to the taxpayers. It's privatizing the profits and socializing the losses. And that has got to stop. Natural infrastructure is another key area that we should be looking at spending in. We want habitat restoration and ecosystem resilience, and the Trudeau government promised in the election to be planting 1 billion trees. Let's start getting those trees planted. This will help alleviate the crash in biodiversity. It'll build natural capital, and it'll build resilience in our ecosystems for things like flood protection, habitat restoration, carbon capture, and through habitat and regenerative agriculture, we can also deal with the climate crisis. So in conclusion, we have a really unique opportunity here to combine fiscal investment with climate responsibility. The ideas that leading economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Nicholas Stearns are bringing forward, scientists and innovators are bringing forward, need to be heeded the same way that we heed the health authorities. We need to listen to these people because we are in a climate emergency as well. And if we're going to have stimulus spending by the government, then we should be spending that money and looking at this climate emergency. And the legacy of this crisis and how we deal with the economy and stimulating the economy coming out of this crisis is going to be crucial to creating a livable planet for our children and our grandchildren. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
We'll now start the question period. As usual, one question, one follow-up. We'll start with the question on the phone and then turn into the room. Opérateur, est-ce que nous avons des questions au téléphone?
Thank you, merci. Please press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. Appuyez sur étoile 1 sur votre téléphone à clavier si vous avez une question.
Okay, we'll turn back to the phone later on. Do we have any question in the room? Sure.
Hi, Mr. Manley, Julie Van Dusen, CBC. So the stimulus spending you're talking about obviously is post-pandemic. I'm just wondering if you're worried that there has been so much spending already. The Parliamentary Budget Officer talks about more than $250 billion to sustain the economy. Are you concerned that post-pandemic will be a lot about cuts?
I am concerned that post-pandemic will be a lot about cuts, and that's why we want to start talking about how we stimulate the economy and the ways that we stimulate the economy. And by spending money in crucial areas, like so creating energy efficiency creates a lot of jobs per dollar. Creating renewable energy projects creates 3 times the amount of jobs that fossil fuel industries create. And what happens after you've created that infrastructure, you have infrastructure in place that can be used for a long time. The maintenance and operation costs are low on that infrastructure, and people who work on that infrastructure can then go back into the other jobs that are available as the economy ramps up. So we are in a climate crisis. We are going to need to deal with this change in our economy, no matter what. And so it's going to take some guidance from government. And, we've heard from the IMF that the way that central banks are working through this crisis and the use of bonds and is not going to be detrimental to the economy overall, that it will balance out, and it's the right thing to do at this time. And we've heard from leading economists that spending stimulus to get out of the crisis and being smart with that stimulus spending is key to getting out of the economic crisis that we're in as well.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we'll be able to spend when it's all over. That's, My second question is, you talked about investments in fossil fuels have stalled the economy. Your leader last week said basically, oil is dead as a driver of economies. There's been quite a backlash to that. What do you make of that?
Well, the petroleum industry has a lot of influence in this country with governments and with media. And I think the leader, Elizabeth May, was just stating the truth. We've seen big oil companies pulling back from the oil sands. And oil isn't completely dead. We're going to be using oil for a while to come. But it's as an industry in this country, the price of getting oil, extracting out of the tar sands, the oil sands, is much higher than it costs to get oil out of places like Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And so we have a glut of cheap oil right now, and we're dealing with geopolitics, and we will be dealing with geopolitics for a while. And the IMF, the International Energy Agency, has said that they're not expecting a bounce back in the oil industry anytime soon. The only part of the energy sector that's growing right now is renewables. So, the writing is on the wall. And I think that, people in Alberta, they're smart, hardworking, innovative people. And what they need to do is start to work on diversifying their economy and not putting so many eggs in one basket.
Can I ask another one then?
By the way,
It's on another topic, but it's a big topic that has prevailed since the pandemic started, about seniors' homes and what's going on in there and having to call the army in. Yesterday, the government made it pretty clear that this is a provincial issue. We'll help, we'll advise, that kind of thing. But no talk of an inquiry, no talk of putting it under the Canada Health Act, no talk of a dedicated transfer with strings attached. Maybe that's something they'll get to later. I don't know. But what do you think should happen?
I think that seniors' care should be brought under the Canada Health Act. Before this crisis, I was talking about a privately owned seniors' home in my riding where the operation had flipped multiple times, sold to different operators a number of times, and each time that operation was sold, the union was decertified, the workers were laid off, and then they were rehired part-time with no benefits at lower wages. And so they were getting $6 an hour less per hour than other workers in other homes. And of course they couldn't keep workers there. And thankfully that home was taken over by the Vancouver Island Health Authority before this pandemic. Otherwise we would have seen a serious problem there. And that's just not acceptable. Having seniors care take, as a profit center, and this was for a foreign corporation. It was sold actually to Onbang Insurance, a Chinese corporation where the CEO was charged with corruption, and then it was taken over by the Chinese state. To have our seniors taken care of in a profit center home by a foreign entity that has no connection to our community is not on, as far as I'm concerned. And we need to put our seniors under proper care, bring them under the Canada Health Act, and make sure that they're taken care of properly, because these long-term care facilities are healthcare facilities. And the model of for-profit care, we're seeing it in different places. I understand that some 75% of the deaths in these long-term care facilities is in private facilities. I don't know if that's the exact number, but I understand it. It's in around that range. And that's a problem. We need to take care of our seniors. These are people that have worked hard in this country. These are the people that have fought in wars for us, who've built this country, and they need to be respected and taken care of properly. How do you put the private ones under the Canada Health Act? Well, we need a different model. We need a completely different model, and this is demonstrating that the old existing model didn't work.
We'll try once again on the phone. Operator, do we have a question on the line?
Yes, we have one question. La première question, first question, from Libertium, the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, thank you. Norway's biggest pension fund put 4 Canadian oil sands companies on its do not invest list yesterday, and I was hoping to get your thoughts on that.
Well, we're seeing a whole bunch of different funds putting Canada's oil sands on the do not invest list. BlackRock, all the big majors are pulling out of investments in the oil sands. And that's the writing on the wall. I mean, the smart money is moving elsewhere. And that's what Albertans need to understand is that the opportunity to make money off of the oil sands, that peak time has passed. And, Alberta was giving away that resource at some of the lowest royalty rates on the planet. And, Norway, they followed the model that Peter Lougheed had, to build a heritage fund with the resources that they had. So they've got $1 trillion in their heritage fund now, and I don't know what Alberta has left in theirs. But the Norwegians were smart. They looked at Peter Lougheed's model, and they took the resource. They asked for top dollar for it. The oil companies didn't balk. They gave them exactly what they wanted. And now they've invested that money all over the place. And Norway is leading in renewable energy, in electrified cars, in social programs to take care of their citizens, in free education, in good health care, in taking care of their seniors. And here in Canada, you know, where we had our day in the sun with an expensive form of energy from the oil sands. And we've tapped out a lot of our conventional reserves, and what we have left is oil sand reserves, and it's expensive to produce. And
on a slightly different topic, you started off by kind of applauding the government for its collaborative approach, and are there particular things that you hope to see continue as we can move on with this minority parliament, and are there things that you're hoping to see improved in terms of collaboration with opposition parties?
Yeah, that's why I'm here today, to talk about infrastructure and public infrastructure and why we need to keep our infrastructure in public hands. I think that we should be looking back at what happened with Connaught Labs in Toronto, where they were, making vaccines, producing vaccines and keeping the intellectual property in public hands, and then making sure that the world had access to those vaccines and that they weren't a profit center for pharmaceutical companies. And we should be looking at those kind of models. We should be looking at major public infrastructure, like I was saying, like an east to west electrical grid, a north-south electrical grid, and having publicly owned electrification of our energy system. So there's a number of things that we'd like the government to consider as we move forward. And again, bringing seniors care under the Canada Health Act is another one of those things. It's been a really hard lesson, and a very difficult lesson for many families and seniors across this country. It's been brutal. It's a brutal lesson for us to have had to learn, and we need to take away from that lesson and take care of our seniors better.
Operator, next question on the line.
We have no further questions registered at this time.
Do we have a quick question in the room? This concludes the press conference then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.